Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this session on a Swedish roadmap for a sustainable economy. My name is Gabriel Wikström and I am appointed the National Coordinator for the 2030 Agenda in Sweden. And a little more than a year ago, I took the initiative to invite stakeholders, actors from both the private and public sector to discuss two questions. The first one was and still is if we could together come to an agreement on what we mean about building a sustainable economy. How do we define it? Could we work together to a common goal? And the second one is the one that we will discuss with this eminent panel today. Namely, could we together form a roadmap to build a sustainable economy? Because as everyone knows who has been discussing, who has followed the issue of climate change and how to build a sustainable society, the economy is key. And without economic solutions, we will not be able to transform society, and we will be unable to fight climate change and all the other sustainable issues that we have to meet. The goal is, of course, or the main premises is how to make it profitable to be part of the solution and costly to remain part of the problem. And rather than pointing fingers, we must recognize our own challenges, learn from others, and call for action at all levels of society, including civil society and the private sector. The Forum on Economy has identified over 100 activities that support the well-being of both people and the planet, as well as bringing sustainable economic development. And we are very happy that we here today have a panel consisting of 4 participants from the forum, and they will tell us more about the initiative and in what way they see the economy as a driver for sustainable development. Very warm welcome, Johanna Fager Wettergren, Head of Sustainable Finance at the Swedish Financial Supervisory Authority, Finansinspektionen. Hanna Gran, Sustainability Lead at Spotify. Anders Kärrberg, Head of Global Sustainability, Volvo Cars. And Karin Lexén, Secretary General at Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, Naturskyddsföreningen. And since you are I really like to start with a question to Johanna Fager Wettergren, Head of Sustainable Finance at the Swedish Financial Supervisory Authority. Channeling financial flows into activities that have low carbon emissions and promote long-term sustainable development is one identified target action to speed up the tempo. From your perspective, how can a roadmap for the economy advance this development?
Well, thank you very much, Gabriel, for arranging this seminar and also for inviting me to share my views. So I want to start by underlining the crucial role that the financial sector will have to play in shifting the economy towards a long-term sustainable development. And it is now well understood that ambitions to tackle the climate crisis cannot be met through public funds alone. So private capital will need to be mobilized at an unprecedented scale. And there is a strong commitment, not least from the EU, to channel private and financial flows towards investments that support the Paris Agreement targets. And as a supervisory authority, Finansinspektionen can help to facilitate this transition and remove obstacles. And at a first glance, the private sector has risen to the challenge. There are strong inflows to what appears to be green investments, but all of this activity obscures a serious underlying problem, as investors are used to having high quality, audited, and globally comparable financial information. However, there is no equivalent for sustainability issues, or maybe I should say there is not yet an equivalent. When present in Glasgow, COP26 last week, attending the Finance Day, there were some major news delivered at the main stage, and stemming from our global work where Finansinspektionen is deeply involved. So the global standard setter IFRS announced it will establish a new board for sustainability standards, and it also published a climate standard prototype. So this, I would say, is an incredibly important piece to have in place to facilitate the transition. And coming back to your question, Gabrielle, a clear roadmap can be helpful in that sense by pointing out the direction and by clarifying what is to be expected.
The Forum on Economy has discussed, not at least with Finansinspektionen being one of the great contributors to this discussion, how could we make Swedish companies to lead the way by disclosing the carbon emissions openly? If you want to be a bit negative or cynical, you may argue that the exposure of how climate change affects businesses is, at least in the short-term perspective, a disadvantage in an international comparison. What do you say to the Swedish companies to convince them of going this way?
Well, I would argue that being open about and disclosing how you as a company affect and is being affected by climate change is crucial for companies today. And the challenge up until today, the challenge for both companies and investors has been that there is not one, but rather hundreds of different standards and frameworks to choose between. But now on carbon emissions, Finansinspektionen and the Forum advocates that firms use internal carbon pricing, which is the cost the firm itself sets in its carbon emissions. And we advocate firms to disclose this information externally. And then why do we advocate that? Well, the price on emitting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases is too low in many parts of the world. And as a result, the investments being made to transition our societies are too small. So internal carbon pricing helps firms to assess the financial impact of future climate measures and the risks of not transitioning. And it can create incentives to transition to more sustainable activities. Also, it helps investors and other external stakeholders to identify risks. So a number of firms, I would say, in Sweden and globally, for that sake, already use internal carbon pricing. And in our view, more firms should do this and also report this information externally. And finally, internal carbon pricing is one of the metrics that will be part of the new global standard and should be expected to be mandatory to disclose going forward.
So it's about being more effective, but also about being ahead of a development that will come whether you like it or not. Thank you so much, Joanna. Turning to Hannah at Spotify, an important objective for our initiative is about bringing the public sector together with companies and communities to see how we can develop a common understanding of the sustainability transformation. I'd like to ask you, what does it mean for a company like Spotify to be part of a collaboration like this?
Well, I mean, I think collaboration is everything, really, if we should get there to that net zero in time, really. So, I mean, for all of us, and I think especially other digital companies like Spotify, a huge part of our emissions, if we talk about climate, of course, and also other social indicators, are related to our value chain. For us in particular, it's like 98% is not under our direct control. So we need to have collaborations across the value chain. But I think that is something that is going on. And I also think kind of in industry, people are talking and supporting each other. But what we really lack is this kind of cross-industry and, as you said, public and private sector, NGOs and others come together to talk about this, because then we can really leverage on the best practices that are out there and like build on each other what everyone is doing instead of reinventing the wheel. So, of course, I'm focusing on climate, and when I think about taking down our emissions to net zero, no offense to Naturskyddsverket, but they wouldn't be the top of mind for me. But when being in such a forum, we can really leverage on that and find new, interesting ideas to kind of tackle key societal challenges. So, and I think that is true for this Agenda 2030, but also for COP26, really.
Well, setting the transition to net zero is, of course, focused on a conference like this, but setting that discussion aside for a moment, Spotify has really taken a clear position to accelerate a diverse culture with successful actions to enhance diversity, inclusion and belonging in the workplace. Can you tell us a little bit about Spotify's efforts, and how do you measure data, and how do you use this data to drive change in the workplace but also in society in general?
I think, diversity is a super important topic for us as well, and we have tried to keep the Swedish heritage in terms of that, making sure that, for example, if we talk about parental leave, that it's the same parental leave for anyone. So no matter if it's a dad, a mom, or or not depending on basically how you become a parent, if you are on your own or so. So that is something that we try to do in all countries where we are present. But I think another topic also that relates to diversity and well-being, I would say, is mental health. And that has been a key focus for us in the past years. So we have a program internally with mental health ambassadors. We do a lot of focus on it. And most recently, actually, last week, almost all of Spotify everyone was off to kind of cater for that the pandemic has really taken a toll on everyone mentally. So everyone was off. I was, of course, here. So I felt it was more wellness week for me to be here during this conference. But otherwise, they do initiatives like that just to focus on mental health. And that is something I think we will see more and more.
Mental health and the social media companies has been a great discussion the last couple of weeks. Would you say that you are ahead of your colleagues in the sector?
Don't know. I mean, I hope at least what we do internally, and also what we can do more with the platform to really promote mental health, because I think that is one of the key challenges that we need to solve. And if we fix that, we'll fix a lot of other problems as well. I mean, we have increasing amounts of eco-anxiety as well. So everything is very closely linked together, and more to come in that space, definitely.
Thank you. Moving on to transportation, the green transition for transportation and mobility is, of course, a cornerstone to reach net zero emissions. Volvo Cars' strategy is to become fully electric by 2030. And you have today announced that you publicly are going forward to track and report greenhouse gas emissions. This is, of course, a great start. But in the forum, we are also discussing how we can impact businesses to go further and also disclose their production chain emissions. So-called Scope 3 emissions, that includes emissions both upstream and downstream of the organization's activities. Anders Kjærberg, Head of Global Sustainability, can you evolve on Volvo Cars' strategy to reduce all carbon emissions in the supply chain in the future?
Absolutely. So having a strategy to reduce carbon in a company, of course, it has to be across the whole value chain. Not only Scope 1, Scope 2, but also Scope 3, which involves the use of the product and also the supply chain emissions. And that's probably the hardest part of actually become carbon neutral. We are asking our suppliers for deliveries to Volvo, use 100% renewable energy by 2025 and also 25% recycled content by 2025. We also ask them for their CO2 footprint today and the recycled content today. What do you deliver to Volvo? And what you realize asking those questions is that they are not really up to date. They don't have this capacity or competence today. So this is a discussion we're in. And adding to this now, we are introducing a price on carbon, which will be used then also, haven't decided exactly how, but will be used in supplier selection, in deciding different types of components. We'll start because we've been waiting for this. I think the international governments have been not successful, slow in finding a global solutions. We admit it's difficult, but we start now by putting the price at 1,000 SEK per ton. It's a bit lower than the Swedish carbon dioxide tax. It's a bit lower. It's a bit higher than what we have in the EU. But we think this is a reasonable price. It will be probably where the EU ETS is going in a few years.
Well, greenhouse emissions would hopefully become less of a problem every year in the future. But one thing that won't go away, and not at least considering the if you are turning the cars electric, is of course the raw materials producing the batteries and the car themselves. I know that Volvo Cars have been working for some time now to implement global traceability of, for example, cobalt used in car batteries by employing a blockchain technology. The goal is to ensure customers that the electrified Volvos are run on materials that have been sourced responsibly. How can blockchain technology drive goals also towards both environmental and social sustainability?
Blockchain is an excellent technology, and it is that you are attaching information to a physical delivery. And that information, the way we use it, is to put guarantees that this delivery is mined responsibly, managed responsibly, transported responsibly. And the benefit with the blockchain technology is that it's traceable and unchangeable. So you can actually apply this throughout the value chain, and you can summarize it up, and then you know that the battery or the aluminum component you have sourced is done so responsibly. So by using it, you automatically force the whole value chain to consider and deliver that type of information. A very hard thing to do when you have global value chains, because as I said, suppliers are not always aware. They don't have the data, but step by step they will. And I think this is a good technology to use for, first of all, for cobalt. We will expand it to CO2 and to other scarce metals, mica and so on, to get control of this.
Thank you. And the move from raw materials to speaking about biodiversity, the step isn't really far, is it? Karin Lexén, Secretary General at Swedish Society for Nature Conservation. Critically important to human health and livelihood is, of course, biodiversity. And I think that the awareness of how it impacts our lives, but also what it means fighting the climate change, is growing every year. Can you explain in what way diversity within spices matters in a sustainable economy?
I think it's really interesting to note that following many negotiations over the past, the recognition of the importance of biodiversity in the climate talks has really risen. I think that's super important, since biodiversity is in fact the safety net of the planet. And if we erode that, we erode the base. And to quote Johan Rockström, all the IPCC scenarios are built on the belief that we will still have healthy ecosystems and existing biodiversity. So if we erupt that base, we cannot believe in the scenarios also. So it's really important to face this together. So eroded biodiversity is in fact both a threat to welfare but also a financial risk. And for instance, you can look at ecosystem services like clean water, food, etc. One interesting example is pollination. We know that pollination is really important. 1/3 of the food that we are eating is to the thank of our pollinators, and there is an estimate globally that the value of this would be around $500 billion. So we really need to recognize biodiversity as a foundation for welfare and for a sustainable growth.
And you actually put a price tag on pollination in this case, and internalizing externalities is really a key issue to discuss when you link economy to sustainability. It's, as probably all know, where users of resources pay for all of the consequences of its use. And what is, in your opinion, the preferable way for an economy to deal with negative externality?
So I think that there are a number of sort of tools that is needed. I think still knowledge and also a good way of sort of valuing, reporting, etc. There was a UN report coming out the other year, I think 2 years or so, the Gupta review, that suggests that you should include natural capital in national accounting system. But then in order to do that, you need good systems for doing so. So you need to sort of include it in the calculations. You also need to find ways to sort of phase out. We talk about phasing out fossil subsidies. You also need to phase out subsidies that is sort of counterproductive to biodiversity. For instance, in agriculture, I would say. On the contrary, you could also see that both agriculture and forestry being managed in a good way also contribute to biodiversity. So you could also sort of build in a compensation to those sectors if they are doing it in a sustainable way. So there are different ways, and of course taxes is another way of sort of putting a price and including externalities in the economics.
Thank you, Karin, for explaining that. Last question, and I would like this to be an around the table question with very short answers because we have a very brief amount of time left. Apart from finalizing the plans to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions in alignment with the Paris Agreement, what is the most important question for the climate summit in order to step up progress? Let's start with you, Johanna.
Well, thank you. So very short, and from my perspective, with a special interest in sustainable finance, I'm focused on what the financial sector can bring to the table. So then it's all about mobilizing finance. And I believe what has come out from COP26 so far is really promising in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Anders?
Lots of things can be done. Agree on a global price on carbon. Encourage all listed companies to set or commit to the climate neutrality by 2050. Only 20% of global listed companies do so. Why should that be acceptable? And then standardize reporting. Financial reporting has been standardized for 50 years. Where is the sustainability reporting? Why is that not standardized? It's getting embarrassing, I think. And of course, as we discussed here today with the vehicle industry, set an end date for selling cars with fossil fuels. Of course, very logical.
Thank you. Karin?
Thank you. I like that. So looking into the negotiations, of course, what is really important at first is that the countries or the parties are sort of delivering on the promises on the $100 billion US dollar yearly. And this not going to be enough, and I really agree with there is a need for sort of financing sources from different sources, and the private sources are of course really important here. But when it comes to the negotiations, the financial issue is of course really important to get things going, and not the least to support those countries that don't have resources at all, and find ways of also sort of leading private finance to those less resourced countries, I think is really important.
And the last issue or argument is really a Swedish core issue here at the conference. Finally, Hannah, what do you think?
I mean, of course, all the decisions being made here are crucial, but I think also the way we communicate those decisions and make sure that it reaches a wider audience, and maybe those not only interested in climate, but so many more, so that we know that the decisions made here also gets accountability in the right way, and also that it's we talk about this in an easier way, so it's more inclusive. So I would focus not only on the decisions, but also how we get them out, I would say.
Anna, Anders, Karin, Johanna, thank you very much indeed for your participation here in the panel, and for your very wise and interesting contributions. Thank you.
Thank you.